The charismatic leadership style of Attila the Hun, the barbarian tyrant whose army followed him to hell and back. In 450 AD, Attila the Hun, better known as the Scourge of God by the Western and Eastern Roman empires, was at the peak of his power and influence. He was planning his next major conquest, the biggest one he had undertaken so far. He wanted the Western Roman Empire to kneel to him and accept him as their ruler. But he had no way of doing this without starting an all-out war. As he sat in his war chamber with his generals, a Roman messenger was brought to him. He had a message from Honoria, the sister of King Valentian III, Emperor of the Western Roman Empire. She requested Attila's help in freeing her from her forced marriage with a Roman senator. Attila believed this could mean many things. Was a Western woman asking for his hand in marriage? Was this the ploy of Flavius Aetius, commander-general of the Western Roman Empire and his former acquaintance? Or was this the perfect excuse for him to lay siege to his most coveted enemy? He desired the counsel of his brother, Bleda. Since 434 AD, the Huns had two kings, Attila and his brother Bleda. Like the past brother kings, Octar and Rugila, Attila and Bleda had put continental Europe, the Visigoths, the Roman empires, and numerous other smaller kingdoms and empires to the sword. All, in varying capacities, had bent to the will of the Hunnic brother kings. If Attila was the scourge of God, then Bleda would be the tactical brain of God. He negotiated tributes with the provinces they conquered, which would make the empire's economy thrive. Tributes would be paid to the brother kings in the form of gold, precious stones, crops, weapons, trade sanctions, tax waivers, and many other desirable elements of commerce. With the guile of Attila and the influence of Bleda, they expanded the Hunnic Empire from the Great Hungarian Plain to the Balkan territories up to the fringes of Byzantium and Sicily in Italy. But with the prosperity came animosity and jealousy. During their last years together, they argued a lot. They disagreed with each other's plans. Eventually, during a hunting trip in 445 AD, Bleda died under unclear circumstances. Attila laid his brother to rest with the highest honors. Bleda was the voice of reason to Attila. Now he was the sole figurehead. In 447 AD, after 2 years of trying to appoint a worthy successor, Attila came to the conclusion that he could not trust anyone. He decided to become the sole ruler with his council of generals and kings of his vassal kingdoms. He knew Bleda would have asked to be patient. Bleda would have told him to find out why she chose the empire's most capable enemy as her savior, without accounting for the war that it would bring. Bleda would have construed this as an act to weaken their presence within their own kingdom, leaving it open to attack from the numerous other enemies of the Hunnic Empire. But he wasn't there to guide Attila or negotiate with Flavius Aetius or King Valentian III. As the message from Honoria began to frustrate Attila, he took the course of action that he was most familiar with. He ordered the messenger be tortured to find out the true intention behind the message. While history is unclear about what the messenger had told him, Attila sent word to the king that he is coming to Honoria's aid, and upon his betrothal to his sister, he would take half of the Western Roman Empire as dowry for the marriage. After 2 years of continuous marching, numerous battles, destruction of numerous provinces, in 452 AD, Attila and the Huns were standing at the door of the Western Roman Empire. With an army of soldiers and archers larger than any other army known to man, Attila had come to claim what he believed to be rightfully his. His army had inbred hatred for the Romans. The messengers from King Valentian III came to Attila and his horse-mounted entourage. Attila ordered the messenger be decapitated and sent back to the king. Many considered this to be a questionable act, and the messenger should have been spared. But Attila was incensed with power and rage by this point. All he saw was the conquest of Rome, with the heads of Aetius and Valentian on a pike at the gates of Rome. Soon it would become clear whether Attila, the greatest commander of the Hunnic horde, was truly the scourge of God, as he had been so fearfully named. The Hunnic Empire, before Attila became king. The first time the presence of the Huns had been noted was by geographer Ptolemy during the 2nd century A.D., when he was noting the people of the Eurasian steppe. In his notes, the Huns were only mentioned fleetingly as a simple agrarian race, raising simple crops and leading a simple life. But as time went on, the Huns became more than farmers. By 350 AD, they were a collective of pastoral warriors. Their primary form of nourishment was meat and milk from the animals they raised. They wielded javelins and had the first known horse-mounted archers of the human race. The Hunnic people, although firmly camped on the beaches and pastures around the Caspian Sea, were convinced of their abilities to expand their empire. In the early part of the 5th century, before Attila, the Hunnic tribe was a relatively small collection of warriors who had marched out of Central Asia, looking to expand their ranks by harmonizing with other tribes of the surrounding areas. They had chiefly come from the north of the Caspian Sea. They had marched to the west towards Rome and Constantinople. The Hunnic army was sizable, but not large enough to undertake conquests. Under the command of the capable brother kings, Rugila and Oktar, the Huns had waged war primarily against the Ostrogoths, who were north of the Black Sea, and the Alans, who were Iranian nomads. There had been attempted raids from the neighboring tribes in the past. Under the diarchy of Rugila and Oktar, all of it was put to a firm end. The Huns not only replied to the attack, but they were able to secure tributes from the invaders in exchange for security and peace. Soon, the instructions to the households of the Huns were no longer just to harvest crops and maintain animal stocks. It was also to prepare the young boys at home to wield javelins and basic weapons. Preparations were made to travel east and conquer lands up to the extent of the Danube River. Once there, they destroyed the Gothic kingdoms and drove the surviving Goths to the fringes of the river. The Goths were forced to cross the river into European lands ruled by the Romans. Rugila was the ruler of the Eastern Hunnic Empire, and Oktar ruled the Western Empire. Once the militaristic supremacy had been established, arrangements were made for the rest of the Hunnic populace to occupy the conquered lands and provinces. It was during this time the practice of taking prisoners of war had begun. A prime example was that of Flavius Aetius, a Roman general who had been kept captive for many years. Whether it was a decision made by Rugila or Oktar is not clear, but they learned much about Rome, Constantinople, and the might of the Eastern and Western Roman empires from General Flavius. In 410 AD, the news came that the Visigoths, known mercenaries of the Goth kingdoms, had laid successful siege to Rome and had proceeded to loot the capital of the Western Roman Empire. Word about this spread quickly, and the Huns were buzzing about the chance to overthrow Rome. But both kings, after consulting with General Flavius, quelled the excitement by maturely stating their need of the hour was to consolidate power and not waste resources on a hasty and dangerous mission. Soon, General Flavius was allowed to return to Rome by the brother kings, as he promised to speak to the new emperor of the Western Roman Empire and make favorable peace terms between the Romans and the Huns. In 430 AD, Oktar stepped away from the position of king, leaving Rugila as the sole leader of the Huns. For the next 5 years, Rugila took 2 young brothers, Attila and Bleda, under his wing. Their exploits were widely spoken about. It was time to prepare for the next generation, and Rugila taught them the ways of a Hunnic ruler. These 5 years were a time of relative peace, as an understanding had been made with Rome and Constantinople, where 350 pounds of gold had to be given to the Huns every year, and they would stop their repeated incursions across the Danube. But in 435 AD, Rugila passed away, and his troops were reeling under a plague that had hit the army. The rule and legacy of Attila the Hun. Attila's date of birth is a topic for debate. Some scholars say he was born in the last decade of the 4th century AD, while others claim he was born in the first decade of the 5th century, specifically 406 AD. If the year is believed to be 406, then he would have taken the throne at the age of 28. As he was raised at a time of rapid change, he learned to adapt quickly to new situations. Along with his brother Bleda, he plotted how to consolidate all the provinces and tribes in the Great Hungarian Plain, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. With Bleda at his side, he would rain down barbaric terror upon the enemies of the West and the North. His brother would negotiate and establish tributes from the conquered provinces, while they quivered under the fear of incurring the wrath of Attila, now better known as the Scourge of God. The rule of Attila the Hun is divided into 2 parts. The first part is his diarchy with Bleda. The second part is his sole dictatorship after Bleda's death. The first half. In 434 AD, King Rugila died after being struck by a bolt of lightning. The Hunnic army was hit by a plague, and many soldiers had died while advancing to Constantinople. King Theodosius II, Emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, saw this as divine intervention to stop the advance of the Hunnic horde. The Huns had not crossed the Danube River, and Flavius Aetius had returned from his exile among the Huns after learning much about them and earning their respect. Aetius was reinstated as the leader of the Western Roman Empire's army, and he would meet the Huns in the battlefield again, albeit under a new ruler. When Rugila died, there were cries to appoint Attila and Bleda as the brother kings of the Huns. It wasn't just because of lineage, though. In past battles, both brothers had shown their skills as commanders and skilled warriors. They had fought side by side in the battles for Greuthungi and Trevingi against the Sarmatians and the Burgundians. In many quarters of the army, they were regarded as great rulers who would bring prosperity and sustained glory to the growing Hunnic Empire. After they took the throne, the first order of business was to expand the army by recruiting the troops from the lands and provinces they had already annexed. They came to favorable terms of understanding with the Ostrogoths and the Alans, who remained loyal to the empire till Attila's death. Numerous other tribes pledged their loyalty to Attila and Bleda, many out of fear of what would follow if they did not bend to their will. Attila's demand for loyalty was evident right from the start. As the first objective of their rule, they had to strike unprecedented fear in the hearts of both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. Knowing King Theodosius II to be a leader of weak will, the brother kings coerced the king to sign the Treaty of Margus, signed in Margus. According to the treaty, the Huns would not destroy Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, in exchange for 700 pounds of gold, opening Roman markets to Hunnic trade, a ransom of 8 gold pieces per Roman soldier, and the return of all Hunnic refugees, even defectors and traitors. Within the empire, Attila set an example of all the defectors in his own way through decapitation, skinning bodies, and execution by dismemberment. His followers saw this and remembered the punishment for desertion. The tribute from the Eastern Romans would do well to fill their coffers, further strengthening the conquest. Under Attila and Bleda, for the Huns, securing a tribe was just as important a symbol of superiority as territory. Once the armed forces had been expanded and their loyalty ensured, Attila plotted with Bleda to expand their empire in other parts. The peace with the Romans had to be given a chance to thrive, especially because of the favorable tribute they would receive every year, before a better opportunity presented itself to attack them again. They turned their attention eastward and ravaged the tribes there. Once they had become numerically strong, Attila set his sights on the Sassanid Empire, better known as the Neo-Persian Empire. Their influence on southeastern Europe and Central Asia was strong. The brother kings decided to approach them from Armenia, as it was located at a strategically advantageous point for them. Attila and Bleda, brimming with confidence, marched their troops into Armenia, hoping to repeat history. The first ravaging of Armenia had happened under the rule of their uncle, Rugila. They planned to penetrate as far south as possible, but here they would face one of their worst defeats as commanders of the Hunnic horde. Attila and Bleda had invaded one of the strongest empires in the world. In their youthful hastiness, they had underestimated their enemy, and the Huns were swiftly dealt with in Armenia. In less than 6 months, the brother kings retreated back to their homeland. When they returned, they learned that the Romans had not paid their tribute, nor had they returned the traitors. Attila was infuriated further when he learned that the bishop of the city of Margus had crossed the Danube and robbed the burial treasures from Hunnic graves. In order to re-establish their dominance, the brother kings decided to wage war on the Eastern Roman Empire immediately. The cities of Margus, Singidunum, and Viminacium were completely destroyed. Till 443 AD, the battle between the two empires raged because of the Romans' repeated default in paying the tribute. By the autumn of the same year, the cities of Sardica, Philippopolis, and Arcadiopolis had been completely sacked. They reached the capital city of Constantinople and defeated the imperial army on the outskirts of the city. But the city was well defended, so Attila and Bleda moved southwards and began raising cities there. Finally, at Chersonesus, Emperor Theodosius forfeited and accepted defeat. The tribute, immediate payment of 6,000 pounds of gold, annual payment of 2,100 pounds of gold, and the immediate return of all Hunnic traitors. This was called the Peace of Anatolius. The brother kings marched back with their greatest plunder ever seen. Before this, they were already legends. Now, they had become demigods. The second half. Till 445 AD, Attila and Bleda had been undisputed rulers for 2 years. Even though they had fought smaller battles across the fringes of the empire, their might had not been tested ever since their victory over Theodosius and the Eastern Roman Empire. They both quarreled about many things, future conquests, each other's halves in the empire, among other petty things. Attila was not the one to back down, and neither was Bleda. One evening, they went on a hunt together. The accounts on what happened that day have differed throughout history. Some say Bleda tried to kill Attila, and in retaliation, Attila plunged his sword deep into Bleda's chest. Others say Attila challenged Bleda to a duel, and after a grueling battle, Attila's sword pierced Bleda's heart. Knowing their respect for one another, Attila and Bleda would have appreciated a good battle if it was one. Regardless of which story is true, Attila came out victorious and from then on became the sole ruler of the Hunnic Empire. Attila ensured Bleda was buried with full honors and according to the traditional practices for a fallen leader. This was followed by a feast in the name of Bleda, which was attended by many of the Hunnic Empire. The night was filled with merriment and debauchery, as was the custom of the Huns. Stories were told of Bleda's cunning ability. Promises and pledges were made to Attila's continued legacy as the greatest king of the Hunnic horde. News of Bleda's death spread throughout Europe and China, with many hoping that this would weaken Attila, as he would now be without his trusted negotiator and counselor. According to the Roman historian Priscius, the night Bleda was buried and the feast was conducted, Attila had a dream that an old man had come to give him the sword of Mars, the weapon of the Roman god of war. The next morning, when Attila woke from his slumber, a shepherd came to the mighty king and told him how a calf had cut its leg on a blade. Upon searching for the blade in his farm, he had found a sword. When he presented the sword, Attila considered this the fulfillment of a divine prophecy. He had been chosen to wield the sword, and he believed that his reign was now blessed by the Roman gods as well. Word of this quickly spread through the army and the empire. It was commonplace to believe that they were now being led by the hand of God. Attila was no longer a demigod. According to the Huns, he was the reincarnation of all the gods they prayed to. In 447 AD, Attila turned the attention of his Huns back towards the Eastern Roman Empire. Their invasion, led by Attila, of the Balkans and Thrace was a bloody massacre. In Thrace, approximately 70 cities had been destroyed. The Eastern Roman Empire was already beset by internal problems such as plague and famine, as well as riots. A series of earthquakes in Constantinople had broken the walled fortification of the city. The last-minute rebuilding of the walls saved Constantinople. Victory over a Roman army left the Huns virtually unchallenged in the Eastern Roman lands, and they raided as far south as Thermopylae. Only disease forced them to retreat, and the war came to an end in 449 AD with an agreement in which the Romans agreed to continue paying Attila an annual tribute of 2,100 pounds of gold without any scope for default. This was called the Second Peace of Anatolius. If these terms were broken, Attila swore to return without the intention of negotiation. By now, Attila had realized that war was not the solution to his problematic relations with the Eastern Romans. He dispatched an embassy to Constantinople, led by the Hunnic commander Edico. While in Constantinople, the Romans plotted to assassinate Attila and wanted Edico to play the role of facilitator. In return, he would be bathed in gold and estate. Edico agreed, but upon returning to Attila's camp, he told his king of the plans of the Romans. In an unprecedented act, Attila chose not to act and let the proceedings go on without any hiccups. When the ambassadors had reached Constantinople and sent their emissary with Edico's bribe, the Roman official was arrested and put in chains. Instead of executing the messenger and sending his remains back to the Romans, the bribe gold was sent back with a message for Theodosius to be careful whom he tried to betray. The emperor from then on paid their tribute on time and did not attack the Huns again. The barbarian king had proven his mettle as a gritty negotiator. The assumption that he would weaken because of Bleda's passing had been proven a misconception. Attila's words were the law of the land. He was the undisputed authority in Eastern Europe, stretching from the Great Hungarian Plain till China. His legend was well traveled, and no one wanted to cross paths with Attila or any of his Huns. In the years after Bleda's death, he had remembered the lessons of his brother. He was a charismatic leader, a cunning negotiator, and a brutal executioner. As per the situation, Attila would mold himself into the required character mold. But when the chance to rule the largest empire in the world presents itself, few would be able to resist the temptation to rely on their most basic instincts, especially during one of history's most savage and unpredictable periods. By 450 AD, Attila and General Flavius Aetius were negotiating the succession of a new Frankish ruler. Attila supported the elder son of the reigning king, while Aetius supported the younger son. While they took a decision on the matter, the Franks were at civil war. Because of the increasing disagreement, respected friends were now turning into enemies. Each had their own kingdom's best interests at heart. Attila was growing increasingly frustrated with the Roman general and his kingdom's arrogance towards the Huns. The tensions between them were rising. He wanted to depose General Flavius and begin marching to Rome. By conquering Rome, Attila would be the rightful ruler of the largest kingdom ever known. It would also be the longest campaign he had ever undertaken. For Attila, from the time of his uncles Octar and Rugila, Rome was the final frontier for the Hunnic people. When he told his generals of his plan to invade Rome, they immediately began preparations. For them, they believed in Attila and his unfailing ability as a great ruler. While civil war raged in the Frankish kingdom, Attila assembled his troops to begin a slow yet steady incursion. Starting with Gaul, he slowly advanced towards Rome. He gathered the troops of his vassal kingdoms, the Gepids, the Ostrogoths, the Rugians, the Syrians, the Heruls, the Thuringians, the Alans, the Burgundians, among others, and began his march west. In 451 AD, he set out for Gaul and arrived in Belgica with an army of 500,000 strong. Attila's army smashed through Germany, causing widespread panic and destruction. In France, he captured Metz, Reims, Paris, Troyes, and finally Orleans. At Orleans on the horizon, Attila saw the face of his old friend and new foe, General Flavius Aetius. He, along with the Visigoth king Theodoric, awaited him to quell the Hunnic advance. Attila promptly commanded his troops to fall back to the Catalonian plains, where the legendary Battle of the Catalonian Plains was fought. Attila's battle line contained his own Hunnic warriors in the center, with Ostrogoths and Germans at the flanks. On the other side of the field was Flavius Aetius's army, with his Romans on the left flank and Theodoric's Visigoths on the right. The battle raged initially, but came to a stalemate, and by night both sides withdrew to their camps. The decisive event actually happened the next day, when the Visigoths discovered that their king had been killed. Infuriated, they surrounded Attila's camp. However, General Aetius realized it was unwise to destroy the Huns. In doing so, it would mean the rise of other barbarians, namely the Visigoths, whom he'd always despised. The Huns were his old allies. He talked the Visigoths out of attacking and allowed Attila to freely retreat. From the Roman general's point of view, the best outcome had occurred. King Theodoric died, Attila was in retreat, and the Romans had the benefit of appearing victorious. With the Eastern Romans, under their new emperor Marcian, causing annoyance for the Huns on the Danube River and having ceased paying their tribute to Attila, Attila and the Huns should have retreated to strengthen their hold on their long-standing enemy. Instead, the defeat at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains was damaging to Attila's reputation and his larger-than-life ego. the scourge of God, now had only one mission: conquer Rome. Later in the same year, Honoria, the sister of Valentian III, Emperor of the Western Roman Empire, had sent a cryptic message to Attila. She requested his help in freeing her from her forced marriage with a Roman senator. Seeing this as the perfect excuse to march to Rome, Attila assembled his remaining troops and marched again, this time across the Alps. Under the garb of still fighting for the honor of his future wife, Attila caught the Romans completely off guard when he appeared suddenly in northern Italy. Attila stormed the walls of Aquileia, Vicetia, Verona, Brixia, Bergamo, and Milan, massacring the population and destroying the cities completely. His next target was the city of Ravenna, where Emperor Valentian III lived. Attila sent word to the king that he is coming to Honoria's aid, and upon his betrothal to his sister, he would take half of the Western Roman Empire as dowry for the marriage. As news of this advance reached the ears of the king, he broke into a panic. Promptly, he fled for Rome from Ravenna. Even though the Huns were met with stiff resistance, they maintained their charge on Rome. Emperor Valentian III, his mother, and members of his clergy spent most of the time in Rome praying. The Pope, Pope Leo I, insisted that Attila will be punished for his atrocities against the empire and God. It would be divine justice for Attila and his army. A plague began to spread through the Hunnic army. This was not by divine intervention, as the Church and the Pope proclaimed. In 451 AD, Italy had suffered a devastating famine, whose effects were being felt in the following year as well. In 452, the produce had improved, but Attila's brazen scorched earth policy had effectively destroyed any increments in production. He soon ran out of nourishment for his troops, and they had to survive on whatever they found. The Hunnic army was also feeling the effects of the 2-year-long continuous march. Attila was advised to stop and treat the diseased, but believing the momentum was in their favor, he kept his charge going. Roman general Flavius Aetius had lost many men in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains as well, and was unable to stop the Hunnic advance. He told Emperor Valentian III that he must negotiate with Attila and put an end to this devastating war. But the emperor feared the savage king more than he feared death. He would not face him. Emperor Valentian III pleaded to the Pope to negotiate with Attila on his behalf and save the empire. After much resistance, the Pope acceded. Accompanied by the Senate's most capable negotiators, they planned to meet with Attila and come to an agreement. But the meeting never happened. During the last days of the march to Rome, the Hunnic Empire was rotting because of plague and famine. Honoria had been sent into exile by her brother and renounced her allegiance to Attila. Before his meeting with the Pope and his counselors, Attila received word that the Eastern Roman Emperor Marcian had defaulted on the payment of their tribute and was preparing to invade the Hunnic homeland. He looked at the camp of his soldiers and the paltry conditions they were living in. Food had become scarce and disease was widespread. The troops were growing tired. Attila had a decision to make. In his conference with his generals, he confessed his desire to end the conquest and return home. And so the Huns turned back and headed towards the Danube River to quell Marcian's invasion. Emperor Valentian and the Pope considered this divine intervention as a sign, indicating the end of Attila's reign. Attila's death. After the disintegration of his army in the pursuit of Rome, Attila returned to the Great Hungarian Plain with his remaining troops. Attila felt defeated for the first time since he began his life as a conqueror. His image of invincibility had been broken in the eyes of his subjects, and worse still, in his own eyes. An uninspired leader is worse than a disenchanted follower. He became less interested in the economics, politics, and militaristic decisions of the Hunnic Empire, thus sowing the seeds for a troubled future. He sent word of caution to King Marcian that if the tributes were not paid, he could expect a full-scale war with the Huns. King Marcian ignored the threat and started spending the gold meant for Attila's tribute on building a stronger army to repel future Hunnic attacks. In 453 AD, Attila was planning to mount an offensive into the eastern Roman territory. Before he began, Attila settled back into his throne, and in the same year he married a young girl named Ildiko, one of his many wives. On the night of their wedding, there was a great feast and debauchery ensued. The next morning, Attila was discovered lifeless. In his drunken stupor, he had suffered a nosebleed and choked to death on his own blood. Attila's last known location. After Attila died, there was a period of great mourning amongst his people. Finally, when he was laid to rest, his body, along with many precious stones and burial treasures, was encased in a coffin made of gold. This coffin was put in another coffin made of silver. The second coffin was then put inside an iron coffin. Following this, a dam was built to change the course of a river. Attila's giant encasement was then buried in the riverbed. Once it had been buried, the dam was broken, and the river flowed in the same path as before, hiding Attila's burial spot forever. Attila's kill count. It is believed that Attila the Hun was responsible for the death of more than 300,000 people during his reign. This included men, women, and children of a large number of tribes, cities, and principalities. Why is Attila the Hun a charismatic leader? A charismatic leader is one who exudes charm and whose persuasiveness inspires a loyal band of followers. Charismatic leaders are driven by their conviction and dedication to a particular cause. They are very skilled communicators who are both vocal and emotionally relatable. It is usual for a charismatic leader to take the lead in order to inspire his or her followers to emulate them. The most distinct feature of a charismatic leader is their personality. Their individual personality has a greater influence than anything else in this particular leadership style. The 5th century AD was still a nomadic time in many parts of the world. One of those parts was the Great Hungarian Plain. Here there were multiple wandering tribes who had no common language. Their cultures matched to a certain extent, but each staked claim to being stronger than the other, thus leading to pervasive conflict and division. The annexation by the two Roman empires from the west and south divided them further. Some swore temporary allegiance to the Roman crowns. Those who didn't were doomed to suffer at the hands of the repeated incursions by the armed Roman forces. As they were neither armed nor trained to negotiate, they were easy to conquer. Like any revolutionary movement in history, an inspirational figure motivates the people to undertake collective action. From the beginning, Attila had shown signs of being a committed and dedicated warrior. Together with Bleda, his brother, they had one aim in every battle: to wreak havoc till they were commanded to stop. Their deep-seated hatred for the Romans was also well known and very relatable. The word of their heroic methods soon spread through the Hunnic society. Before they became kings, they were icons of bravery and fearlessness. Their ascension to the throne as successors to Oktar and Rugila was not a matter of discussion. It was inevitable. While uniting the various tribes of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, Attila's vision of creating an empire much larger and stronger than the Romans guided his hand and words. It was more important for him to unite all the tribes by inspiring them to join him on his journey than to fight them and compel them to submit to his will. Attila's image served him well to secure the loyalty of these tribes. The Huns united behind him and were the highest-ranking warriors in the army. The other tribes were also given prestigious ranks in his army, if their exploits of war were worthy of such a reward. Attila made it clear that securing a tribute was a better victory than annihilating the opponent. In this way, they had other kingdoms and tribes working for their economy while they focused on capturing territories. When Attila took the fight to the Eastern Roman Empire, marauding across the Danube River, his image of being the strongest Hun was cemented. The Romans were the foreigners who were partly responsible for the drudgeries of the Hunnic people and the other tribes. They were not welcome across the Danube, and the Romans took the liberty to attack their villages whenever they wanted, looting and pillaging settlements. What had been a dream of stomping into Roman territory and decisively crushing their ego became a reality because of Attila's daring leadership. Numerous Roman emperors feared the name of Attila, the scourge of God. They opened up their cities to Hunnic trade and pledged to pay tons of gold to keep him from unleashing his fury on them. Under Attila, the balance of power had shifted and the Huns were the ones being feared. Attila delivered this through fearsome battle techniques, shrewd negotiation, and an intimidating reputation. For almost 20 years, a select few would dare cross paths with him.